Some were hoping after the gauntlet that was the 2024-25 season, the Kentucky Wildcats would maybe get a little bit of an easier schedule, and that's clearly not the case.
You are Locked On Kentucky, your daily podcast on the Kentucky Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, what's going on, Big Blue Nation? Welcome on into Locked On Kentucky, your daily Kentucky Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Lance Dawe, and on today's episode of Locked On Kentucky, we've got a schedule to look at. That's right, Kentucky's entire 2025-26 schedule has been released, and it is a doozy. Going to dive into the non-con now that it's filled out. The SEC slate has been scheduled out. My thoughts overall: it's going to be a tough one. We'll break that down, as well as Andrea Jelovich is going to be here within the next couple of weeks. Kentucky's front court rotation, I think, is the key to a potential national championship. And speaking of that front court, if Jaden Quaintance isn't healthy to start the season, what happens to the Kentucky Wildcats? We'll break all of that down here for you on today's show. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. You can download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Thank you guys so much for making Locked On Kentucky your first listen every single day. Want to remind everyone out there that we are free and available on all platforms. If you're watching on YouTube, would love it if you subscribe to the show, trying to get to 20,000 subscribers before the start of the college basketball season. Would love it if you are just watching and you're new. If you joined up, it would be much appreciated. All right, so Kentucky's 2025-26 schedule has been released. They knocked out most of this on Friday or late Thursday last week, I believe. There were 3 non-con games expected to be added, and those got added earlier this afternoon here on Monday. So we'll walk through this from top to bottom, give my thoughts on each game as we go along. This is as difficult, if not more difficult, than last year's schedule, primarily because of a couple of the non-con matchups, but more specifically, just what we're getting out of this SEC slate. You're seeing if Florida twice here, you have to go on the road for a lot of your more difficult matchups. We'll break that down here, but again, we'll start here at the top. With the exhibition games, obviously, we're going to be playing Purdue October 24th. And that is going to be at a Friday there at Rupp. Purdue, I think a lot of people would agree, is the number one overall team heading into this season. They're the preseason number one overall when you look at various preseason top 25s, when you look at anybody's bracketology, way too early stuff there. The Boilermakers are the best, and it's because of the combination of players that they have returning, and then a couple of different guys that I was really high on in the transfer portal that they ended up snagging. Oscar Clough at center, Trey Kaufman-Wren. You also have Braden Smith coming back there at point guard. This is an incredibly talented team, stacked across the board. They're going to be able to score at will, it feels like, this upcoming season, and they're going to be a very tough test for the Wildcats, especially if they don't have Jaden Quaintance, which my assumption is that they won't. Rim protection might be a concern in that game. Then you have October 30th on a Thursday there, Georgetown, another exhibition game. Not as big of a deal here playing against the Hoyas, but still, it's nice to get some sort of actual opponent instead of just some no-name school. Georgetown 18-16, led by Ed Cooley a season ago. One of the better defenses in the country, one of the better defenses there in the Big East. Top 5 there. Did not finish with an above 500 record in conference play, but they've got some pieces returning. They should be a pretty solid opponent for Kentucky to play after playing the the number one overall team in the country, and that is in Purdue. So we knew those 2 games were already going to be here, right? And then we get into the non-conference games that were announced earlier today. Kentucky is going to open up the 2025-26 season against Nicholls. That is going to be on November 4th here in Rupp Arena. Then they will play Valpo on November 7th, just 3 days later on Friday. And that is all you get before your trip to Louisville. Just 4 games, 2 exhibitions, 2 not, before you travel to play the Cardinals on November 11th on a Tuesday there. It's a shame that this is not on the weekend, that this is on Tuesday in the middle of the week. I don't understand why that's the case, but nevertheless, a difficult challenge for the Cats. And then the third non-con game that was announced earlier today, Eastern Illinois, a part of all 3 of those games, by the way, Nicholls, Valpo, and Eastern Illinois, a part of the BBN United Tip-Off Classic. And then you go to Madison Square Garden to play Michigan State. That is on November 18th. Michigan State, supposed to be one of the better teams in the nation this upcoming season as well, might be taking a bit of a step back after their deep tournament run last season, projected to be the number 22 overall team in the country, according to Bart Torvik, one of the better defenses in the nation, offense pending. Might be something interesting to note there as that game is being played in MSG, a place that Kentucky has not played very well as of late. But hey, maybe the other team struggling a little bit offensively might give Kentucky a chance there to spring a huge win over the Spartans. Then November 21st, you play Loyola. That is Loyola, Maryland, not Loyola, Chicago or anything like that. Loyola, Maryland at Rupp. Tennessee Tech on November 26th. Before you turn around and play on December 2nd, North Carolina in the SEC ACC Challenge there in Rupp. Glad we're getting the Tar Heels in Lexington this season. I'm not quite sure what North Carolina's roster is going to look like, meaning I don't necessarily know just how talented they're going to be. Obviously, they've got Seth Trimble back there at point guard, but overall, I'm just not sure if I'm a huge believer in what North Carolina has done with their roster this offseason, whether or not they're going to be able to compete with teams like Kentucky night in and night out. I think that is a legitimate question that a lot of people have. Right after North Carolina, you have Gonzaga, December 5th, Friday at Bridgestone Arena in Nashville, Tennessee. I will be there. I'm going to be at that game. Should be pretty fun. December 9th, 2025, North Carolina Central. And then a few days later on Saturday, this is the first Saturday matchup of Kentucky's schedule, I believe. December 13th, you play Indiana. That should be a huge non-con game. We've had Locked On Hoosiers host Jacob Goins on the show to talk about that game. We're probably going to have him on the show here soon to talk about some recruiting battles that Kentucky and Indiana are in. Darren Rippey Jr. might be something that we talk about at length. I really like poking fun there with Goins because it seems like Kentucky's doing everything they can to try and get this kid, and Indiana wants him pretty bad too. So December 13th, you play the Hoosiers. December 20th is the St. John's matchup in the CBS Sports Classic in Atlanta. December 23rd, 2 days before Christmas, you get Bellarmine at Rupp Arena. And then your conference slate starts. And ladies and gentlemen, it is a doozy. We'll continue to break all of that down and more here in just a second. Before we do that, though, tell you guys about our friends over at Game Time. Guys, we've all been there, trying to log on early and waiting forever for concert tickets to go on sale, only to lose your spot for a show that you've been dying to see. I have absolutely been there. Live music should be about making memories, not the stress and dealing with all the negatives of ticket shopping. That's where Game Time comes in because they make getting concert tickets faster and easier than ever. Prices actually drop as it gets closer to showtime, and you can save up to 60% off with their killer last-minute deals. If you're tired of endless scrolling, trying to find the best deal, Game Time Zone picks the best seats in the section, your section for you. And if you ever wonder what your view will actually look like before you buy, I'll just go ahead and tell you, as somebody that uses Game Time for literally everything, sporting events, concerts, comedy, theater, anything near me, the pictures on Game Time are even better than they are even better than in person than they are on the app, and they give you a panoramic seat view. It is absolutely incredible what Game Time is able to do for you, and you can take the guesswork out of buying your concert and show tickets with Game Time by downloading the Game Time app, creating an account, and using code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, continuing along here on the Monday edition of Locked On Kentucky. Lance Dawe hanging out here with you. Really appreciate you guys checking out the show today. If you have not subscribed to the YouTube channel or the podcast feed, would love it if you did so. So we've got the non-con slate out of the way, which to really quick rapid fire those games here for you again. Purdue, Georgetown, both exhibition games. Nichols to open the season. Valpo at Louisville, Eastern Illinois, Michigan State in the Champions Classic, Loyola, Maryland, Tennessee Tech, North Carolina in the ACC SEC Challenge, Gonzaga in Tennessee, North Carolina Central, Indiana, St. John's in the CBS Sports Classic, and then Bellarmine on December 23rd. And then you get into the SEC slate. And what better way to start off your 2025-26 SEC schedule than a road trip to Coleman Coliseum? That's right, Alabama on the road is going to be your SEC opener. Now, I remember a couple of years ago, the SEC opener for Kentucky was on the road at Florida. And we talked a lot about that game leading up to it, saying, hey, look, if Kentucky can find a way to win this game, you are starting to feel really good about what the Wildcats could accomplish during the conference slate and about where they could end up, I guess at the end of the season. I'm trying to pull this up here for you guys real quick. If I'm not mistaken, it was 2 seasons ago. You open up the season on the road at Florida, you get a 2-point win, turn around, you beat Missouri. Unfortunately, the middle of that season didn't necessarily go as Kentucky would have liked for it to have gone, particularly because of the fact that Kentucky couldn't play defense and they weren't starting Dillingham and Shepard. Anyway, that's a conversation for another day. You go on the road to Alabama to open the SEC slate. I think that is also a game where you look at it as a measuring stick here for the Wildcats as to whether or not they are truly able to keep up with the best of the best, not just in this conference, but also in the country. Would like to see JQ healthy, fully healthy at this point. You would like to see Kentucky firing on all cylinders, offensively, defensively. I want to see Kentucky holding opponents at the rim more. We'll see what happens, but that is your SEC opener, and it is a big one. You turn around, and then you play Missouri on either January 6th or 7th. It has not been announced yet. That will either be a Tuesday or a Wednesday. And then you play Mississippi State at home. Those are back-to-back games on either the 6th/7th or January 10th there, 2026 on a Saturday against Mississippi State. So I'm going to walk through here actually as we go along and just kind of give you my first initial impressions as to what Kentucky should be here during this SEC slate. At Alabama, I think is going to be a loss, but also turn back around, like I mentioned, Missouri and Mississippi State. I think both those games will be wins. So you're at 2-1 here before you travel on the road to LSU. Now, I know I've talked a little bit about LSU on the show this offseason about how they had an impressive portal class. Unfortunately, it's still Mac McMahon and just kind of an unknown as to whether or not if LSU is going to take that next step, if they ever will. I'm not sure. I think Kentucky can go on the road and get a win there, especially after seeing what Mark Pope's squad did to LSU a season ago. Unfortunately, the team after that might be a little bit more difficult at Tennessee. So we've seen Kentucky have an impressive amount of success against the Vols on the road over the last 3-ish years, right? Mark Pope did it. John Calipari did it. We've seen different teams go into Thompson Bowling Arena and just stun Tennessee despite being underdogs. Will you see that again this year? I'm not entirely sure if you will. Tennessee supposed to have, again, one of the best defenses in the nation. The offense is still a question mark. If I were ranking these teams in the SEC, I would say that Kentucky is probably a couple of spots higher than Tennessee. I think a lot of people would probably agree with that. I think Kentucky's going to have a better roster than the Vols do overall, just on paper heading into this year. So if this was played at a neutral site, if this was played in Rupp, I would give the nod to Kentucky, but I'm not just going to sit here and say, well, we've beaten them the last several years, so why don't we just beat them again in Thompson Bowling Arena? I think there's more nuance to it. With a team like LSU, it's like, yeah, we beat them last year, probably going to beat them again this year. Because the team's not as good, they kind of suck, and I'm not sure how long their head coach is going to be there, but a team like Tennessee with Rick Barnes, more established, higher floor here for the Vols, even if they're not as good as they think they're going to be or whoever thinks they're going to be. Torvik has them as like, a top 12 team? Number 13 in the nation. I'm going to chalk this up to being a loss here. 2-3, or 3-2, to start off the slate. Texas should be much improved with Sean Miller at the helm. I actually need to see, where is Texas here in the Torvik rankings? Actually 36th, but that's still nothing to scoff at. That's still a very good squad. I think Kentucky can beat them, though. They almost beat them with what was essentially their B squad in Austin a season ago. So you're sitting at 4-2, heading into another home contest against Ole Miss. Ole Miss, I think, is a big sleeper in this league. They've got some really big pieces back. They got some big-time recruits in. They should be tall and physical. They should be able to play the style of defense that Chris Beard wants them to play. Watch out for Malik Dia in his second season in Oxford. I think he could end up being very special. Yes, they lost some pieces, but I'm really high on the Rebels. Despite that, because it is in Rupp Arena, I'm going to give Kentucky the win. If this was on the road, probably a different story. Vanderbilt lost some pieces. Got some guys in through the portal. Really excited with what they're doing with their new head coach there. Obviously beat Kentucky a season ago. So not all, something that's been annoying about Vanderbilt over the last few years with Mark Bynting now there at the helm. It feels like whenever we look at Vandy on the schedule, it's like, okay, they're Vanderbilt. Kentucky should be able to beat them. And you've seen guys like Tyron Lawrence and their cast of players, Jason Edwards or whoever else was there a season ago, terrorize Kentucky. And I don't mean terrorize like blow them out. I just mean like beat them when it feels like Kentucky should not have lost. On the road at Vandy, let's try and change some fortunes this season. I think that Kentucky's roster is much improved. I think that they will be able to protect the rim a lot better than they did a season ago, just specifically because of Jaden Quaintance being out there. You sit there at 5-2, heading into a road game against Arkansas on January 31st. The rematch after getting embarrassed in Rupp Arena a season ago by John Calipari and the Arkansas Razorbacks. You would like to try and find some revenge in this game. And ladies and gentlemen, I think they're going to get it. I think that Kentucky will beat Arkansas on January 31st. Just comes down to, I think Kentucky probably has a better overall roster, and I don't trust Cal in close games. We've seen it enough. Oklahoma is the turnaround game there after the back-to-back road games against Vandy and Arkansas. February 3rd, I'm going to chalk that up as a win. So Kentucky now sitting at 8-2, heading into the second game against Tennessee. I'm going to say that that's a win. I think Kentucky gets a dub against Tennessee at home. At Florida is where you take your third loss. The Gators going to be one of the best teams in the nation. I think, again, they reloaded at guard. They're going to have a crazy rotation 3 through 5 with Howe, Condon, Chenyolu. That is going to be a crazy long team. It's going to be hard to beat, especially in Gainesville. Turn back around, you play Georgia on either the 17th or the 18th of February. That's where you're going to get your 10th SEC win of the season. Then you go on the road to Auburn, February 21st on a Saturday. I think that you lose that game despite me not necessarily having a lot of faith in the Tigers. I think that for me in this contest, you could flip that Auburn or Arkansas game, like saying that they go 1-1 in those contests, and I would be fine with that. I'm not exactly sure how I feel about the Tigers this upcoming season, just because they went to the Final Four, they lost all these pieces, they get Pettiford back, they get their lead guard back, but they sort of surround him with JUCO and D2 prospects. I mean, they got Keyshawn Hall from UCF, which is good, but I'm not sure. At South Carolina on the road, February 24th. Sorry, Chris Marler. That is going to be your 11th win. 11-4. Then you play Vanderbilt again on February 28th at Rupp Arena. You are now 12-4 at Texas A&M. Bucky Ball in his first season. This is a game that Kentucky could absolutely trip up in. I'm going to say that they don't. I'm going to say Kentucky is right now 13-4 heading into their final game of the season at home against Florida. That's right. You play Florida twice, despite only playing them once in Rupp Arena a season ago. This could very well be for the SEC championship, for the regular season title, with Kentucky sitting at 13-4, Florida sitting at goodness knows whatever they are. Maybe it is for second seed in the SEC tournament. I think Kentucky can win this game. I'm going to project them right now, too. We'll see what happens when that game gets around. But as of today, I think Kentucky 14-4 in the SEC, just because of how highly I think of this roster, I think is very obtainable. Who knows? Maybe they go higher than that. There are some losable games on the schedule. There are some very difficult road contests. Let's dive into it in a little bit more detail in just a second. I want to remind you guys real quick, though, if you've not subscribed to the show already, I would love it if you did so. We are trying so hard to get to 20,000 subscribers, not 13. We already passed that. We're 4,000 subscribers past that. We're trying to get to 20,000 subscribers before November, essentially. If we could get there, it would be incredible. I think that we can pull it off. Join up if you have not already. We went through the entire schedule there just now, breaking down the non-con and the SEC slate. The thing about the SEC slate that is so tough is some of the cream of the crop here in the SEC, most notably Alabama, Arkansas, Auburn. All of those teams, all three of those teams you have to face on the road, and you do not get a chance to rematch. You do not get them at home. Plus, you have to play home and homes with Tennessee and Florida. this is a gauntlet. This is not easier than what you had a season ago. This is arguably more difficult than what the Cats had. And that kind of stinks because you could be, if worst case scenario comes to fruition, you could be without Jaden Quaintance for maybe the first couple of games of SEC play if worst case scenario happens. Personally, I still think that he's going to be available by the start of the year. I think that he'll be available and ready to play by the time Louisville comes around. Like, he will be able to play meaningful minutes by the time Kentucky's biggest game gets here against the Cardinals. I really like, by the way, Michigan State being the second big game here in Madison Square Garden. That is a very good team led by an excellent coach. But at the same time, though, that game is winnable. That game is gettable depending on how Kentucky is faring on defense, I should say, early in the year. But again, road games against Tennessee, Florida, Arkansas, Auburn, Alabama. This is going to be very difficult. If Kentucky is going to win the SEC, they're going to have to do so on the road. I think that's kind of been the case. That's kind of been a no-duh thing. It's become very difficult to win on the road in this conference over the last half decade or so, with the rise of Auburn, with the rise of Tennessee, with the rise of Alabama and Nate Oates. This has been a tough out now that the middle of this conference has sort of risen above and not just become good, but have kind of comfortably placed themselves among the elite in college basketball. This is tough. 14-4 is so doable, or better, because of what I think Kentucky can be on defense. If they can be better on defense, the sky is the limit for this Wildcats team. Jaden Quaintance is the piece here. To go back to the non-con slate, though, real quick, I do not want to gloss over this. Louisville and Michigan State are tough. North Carolina is going to be difficult. I would say that that's probably the easiest on paper right now of your handful of power 6, power 5, I guess at this point, matchups here. I think North Carolina is probably the easiest. You cannot gloss over Indiana. Absolutely destroyed Mega Superbet the other day. I think went on like a 70-19 run or something like that. I mean, they were just putting it on them, scoring bucket after bucket after bucket. Really impressive stuff. St. John's will be one of the best teams in the nation, led by Rick Pitino. That's going to be a fascinating matchup on December 20th against Pitino and his former player, the student going up against the teacher. I think Kentucky has a better roster. That game's being played in Atlanta. We'll see what happens. That's going to be a very, very, very tough out. Gonzaga on December 5th. Let's just be frank. Let's call it what it is. Gonzaga probably should have beaten Kentucky last year. They probably should have, but they didn't. Kentucky found a way to pull back in the second half, play better defense at the rim. Gonzaga just couldn't hit some shots, and the Cats found a way to win that one they gave me a heart attack in the process. You cannot look over that game either. I mean, these non-con matchups are no joke. You have to be ready for every single one of these. And to be honest with you, if Quaintance is not healthy, you're going to take some lumps. That's just the way it is. You brought in one of the best defenders in the nation, if not the best. If he's not ready to go for you, you got some issues here. Your front court is going to dictate whether or not you can win a national championship. I know that everyone wants to talk about it's about your guard play, which I think that it will be about guard play at certain moments. But to be honest with you, Kentucky's bigger issues have been around the rim. And if you can get JQ healthy, if you can get Andrea Jelovic in here in less than 2 weeks, things are going to be pretty good. Jelovic, I think that he might be overlooked here a little bit. Not just by national media, but by Kentucky fans as well. Jelovic was a sought-after forward that played for Nikola Jokic's former team. He is an uber-talented 6'11", stretch 4-5 guy that can spray it, that can handle, and is going to be a valuable asset on this team. We may be undervaluing just how important he could be at the 4 because of how much Kentucky needs shooting there. And they need maybe somebody that can be a little less rigid than Jaden Quaintance and Brandon Garrison are. Speaking of JQ, what if Jaden Quaintance isn't healthy? What if he's not healthy for most of this non-conference slate? At Louisville, Michigan State, North Carolina, Gonzaga, Indiana, St. John's. Like I mentioned a second ago, Kentucky is probably going to take some lumps, which, frankly, is not great because of what your SEC slate sets up to be, right? You cannot afford to get off to a slow start this year. You cannot afford to let it happen. Brandon Garrison, who we've heard, according to reports, has been very up and down throughout the course of the offseason, is going to have to step up. He has to be a more consistent player. And then there's the wild card here at the beginning of the season. Look, if JQ's not healthy, we know how Mark Pope's going to do this thing. He's going to rotate him in and barely play him minutes. Almost definitively, unless he is fully healthy, ready to go, JQ's not going to get a ton of minutes. And it's probably going to infuriate a lot of this fan base. Just brace yourself for that. What may help us kind of cope with the fact that we don't have a healthy rotation at our 5 is how Malachi Marino plays. The wild card here is your 5-star freshman center, who, according to reports, has actually been playing pretty well, all things considered. High floor, not the most athletic, not the fastest guy out there, but he's making plays, and he's a really good rebounder and can be a good rim protector. I think that Marino has the upside to patch up some of Kentucky's issues. Some of. But regardless, JQ not being healthy for the first, 10, 12 games of the season could prove to be a huge issue for the Wildcats when tournament time comes around. Some of the people that I talk to in my circle are not as big on non-con games and what your seed line is. I get a lot of pushback from people saying your seed does not matter. Yes, it does. It absolutely does. The math, the history, to everything indicates that your seed will dictate whether or not you can make a run in the NCAA tournament. It's about the matchups. You want the easiest ones possible to make as deep of a run as possible. That is just how it goes. And some of your more efficient teams, title winners, Final Four teams, over the last 25 years, they can sort of compensate for maybe not as easy of a run by just saying, okay, well, we're just better. We're more athletic. We're more skilled. We have a better coaching staff. But if you want to make a run, you want the easiest path possible. And the best way to do that is by getting as high of a seed line as you possibly can. That is how this works. Again, I think I shouted this out on the Thursday episode, where I said that there's a great video by SB Nation and John Boys titled "The NCAA Tournament is a Losing Machine." Go and watch that video. It will explain to you how this all works. If you're not a specific team or a specific team, you're almost never going to pull this off or get close. These first non-con games will be dictated by how Kentucky plays defensively. Full stop. And a lot of that has to do with whether or not your 5-star center, Jaden Quaintance, is ready to go. If he isn't, I'm not saying sound the alarm, but some other guys are going to have to step up in big ways. And right now, we just haven't seen that happen. All we can do is be hopeful. So that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Kentucky. You can follow the show on Twitter at Locked On UK. You can follow me on Twitter at @LanceDawe_, and follow the show over on Instagram. That is at Kentucky Podcast. Any questions, comments, concerns, leave those in the comments below. Hit me on the socials. I'll see you all tomorrow. Hope you guys have another great rest of your day, and God bless.